Water that had been an ordinary creek only hours earlier was now tearing through Tates Creek Road in Richmond, Kentucky, carrying debris, furniture, and pieces of buildings with it. Nearby, the Million Bible Church stood half-collapsed, its walls torn open by a force strong enough to move consecrated ground. Somewhere in the darkness, drivers sat trapped in vehicles surrounded by rising water, waiting for help that was already stretched thin across the county. Officials had confirmed at least 4 deaths, and that number was still being assessed. This was central Kentucky, and Madison County had just become the center of a disaster still unfolding. The rain that caused it did not fall gently. A storm system moved over the region and, in a relatively short period, dropped several inches of water onto ground that was already saturated from previous rainfall. There was little room left in the soil to absorb what was coming, and the creeks and rivers of central Kentucky had nowhere to put the excess but out and over their banks. What began as heavy rain became something far more dangerous within a matter of hours, leaving little time for warnings to translate into action before floodwaters were already moving through neighborhoods. Richmond felt it first and felt it hardest. Water levels in the city rose with a speed that outpaced the ability of residents and officials to keep up. Streets that carried normal evening traffic became impassable rivers. Tates Creek Road, one of the area's key corridors, was transformed into a scene of extensive destruction. Floodwaters powerful enough to undermine structures and sweep away anything not anchored to the ground. It became, almost immediately, one of the defining images of the disaster, and footage of the ruined Million Bible Church near that same road spread rapidly across social media, giving people far outside Kentucky a visceral sense of what the region was enduring. But Tates Creek Road was not the only front. On University Drive, also in Richmond, severe flooding moved into residential neighborhoods, putting homes and the people inside them directly in the path of rising water. Emergency responders spent considerable time in that area alone, conducting rescue and recovery operations as conditions continued to deteriorate around them. Roads that residents used every day to reach families, jobs, and safety had become obstacles instead. And for some, there was no way out except by boat or by wading through water that was neither shallow nor safe. As the rain continued, the isolation spread. Neighborhoods that had been connected to the rest of the county by ordinary roads found themselves cut off, surrounded by water that had turned familiar streets into fast-moving hazards. Local officials urged residents to avoid all unnecessary travel, aware that every vehicle on the road was a potential rescue waiting to happen. That warning proved necessary. Dozens of swift-water rescue operations were launched across Richmond as firefighters, police officers, and other emergency responders moved from vehicle to vehicle, home to home, pulling people out of water that showed no sign of receding. These teams worked for hours under difficult and often dangerous conditions themselves, navigating currents strong enough to move cars in order to reach people who had no other options left. By the time the worst of the flooding hit, major roads throughout Madison County were closing one after another. Intersections, highways, and rural roads alike disappeared beneath the water, and what had been routine travel became, in some cases, a matter of life and death. Emergency crews found themselves working 2 problems simultaneously: reaching people who were already trapped, while trying to track which roads remained passable enough to get help through it all. As the scale of the emergency became clear, Richmond officials made it official, declaring a local state of emergency. That declaration did more than describe the situation. It unlocked resources, allowing emergency personnel and equipment to be mobilized more quickly, while shelters were prepared for the residents who had already lost access to their homes, or who soon would. Richmond's crisis, though, was only part of a larger picture developing across the state. As the rainfall continued to affect communities well beyond Madison County, Kentucky Governor Andy Beshear declared a statewide state of emergency, a signal that this was no longer a localized flooding event, but a threat spreading across central and eastern Kentucky. Officials cautioned that additional rain in the forecast could prolong the danger rather than ease it, meaning that even as some areas began to cope with what had already happened, others might still be waiting for their worst hour. That warning bore out. Jackson County emerged as one of the hardest-hit areas outside Madison County, where torrential rainfall caused creeks to overflow with a speed that prompted flash flood emergencies across several communities. Emergency crews there faced much the same reality as their counterparts in Richmond: flooded neighborhoods, limited access, and residents needing to be reached quickly. Farther away, Bullitt County reported serious flooding of its own, another data point in what was becoming a statewide pattern rather than an isolated tragedy. In one especially tense development, authorities advised residents near a dam embankment to evacuate as a precaution after a landslide affected part of the structure. Officials were careful to note that there was no immediate sign the dam itself was failing, but the caution was not taken lightly. When Earth begins to move near a body of water held back by an engineered structure, even a modest risk is treated as one worth acting on immediately, and evacuating in advance costs far less than waiting to see what happens next. Across the state, the response settled into a rhythm defined by exhaustion and urgency in equal measure. First responders worked around the clock, moving between water rescues, road clearances, and check-ins on residents whose homes had become islands surrounded by floodwater. Emergency management agencies coordinated closely with local governments, trying to ensure that resources went where they were needed most, even as needs kept shifting from one county to the next. Throughout it all, officials repeated a message that sounds simple but carries real weight in moments like these. Never attempt to drive through flooded roads. Even water that looks shallow and manageable can carry enough force to sweep a vehicle off the pavement. And in a disaster defined by exactly that kind of misjudged crossing, the reminder was not routine. It was necessary. What made this event especially difficult to manage was the sheer speed of its escalation. In community after community, conditions shifted from ordinary rainfall to life-threatening flooding in only a matter of hours. That compressed timeline gave emergency responders very little room to react, let alone get ahead of the danger. Flash floods, by nature, do not offer the luxury of a slow build. They arrive fast, and central Kentucky experienced that reality directly, with creeks that residents had known their whole lives becoming unrecognizable in the space of a single evening. Eventually, in some communities, the water began to recede. But retreat did not mean recovery. As floodwaters pulled back, crews shifted their focus toward the next phase of the disaster, assessing the damage left behind, clearing debris from roads and properties, and working to restore basic access to neighborhoods that had been cut off for hours or days. Road inspections and infrastructure evaluations continued well after the rain stopped, a reminder that a flood's danger does not end the moment the water goes down. Weakened roads, undermined foundations, and damaged embankments can remain hazardous long after the skies clear. It was not only official agencies carrying that weight. Community organizations, volunteers, and local shelters stepped forward across the affected areas, offering donations of food, water, clothing, and other essential supplies to residents suddenly without homes or basic necessities. In the space created by disaster, ordinary residents became part of the response effort themselves, filling gaps that no single agency could cover alone. Through it all, Madison County remained the center of the story. Richmond, Tates Creek Road, University Drive, and the heavily damaged Million Bible Church became the images most people would associate with this event, the specific places where the abstract idea of a flash flood became something concrete and visible. A church with its walls torn open, a road transformed into a river, a neighborhood surrounded by water that, a day earlier, no one had thought twice about. What happened in central Kentucky was, in the end, a demonstration of how little warning a flash flood can give and how much damage it can do once it arrives. Saturated ground, a few intense hours of rainfall, and rivers with nowhere to go combine to put entire communities at risk almost overnight. The response, from firefighters wading into fast-moving water to volunteers organizing donations days later, showed how quickly a region can be forced to adapt when its infrastructure and its patience are both pushed past their limits. As officials continued urging residents to stay informed and heed flood warnings going forward, the underlying lesson was hard to miss. In a landscape of creeks and rivers already carrying a heavy season's worth of rain, it takes very little to turn calm water into a genuine emergency, and very little time to do it. If you've made it this way through the story of what happened in Madison County and across Kentucky, thank you for watching to the end. Stories like this one deserve to be told carefully and completely, and staying with us through every stage of it means a lot. If this channel helps you understand how these disasters unfold, and what it really takes to respond to them, consider subscribing to Storm Strike so you don't miss the next one. And if you found value in this video, a like goes a long way in helping others discover it too. Thank you for being here. We'll see you in the next one.